Welcome to the Why on Earth Community podcast. Today, we are visiting with Jeff Moyer, the CEO of Rodale Institute. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Aaron. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really excited for our conversation. I know we've got a lot to cover for our audience. And before we dive in, let me tell them a little about you and your background. Jeff Moyer is the Chief Executive Officer of Rodale Institute and has been on staff at Rodale Institute for over 44 years. He spent over 30 years as Farm Manager Director, was appointed as Executive Director of the Institute in September of 2015, and became CEO in September of 2019. Jeff was project leader on the highly acclaimed Organic No-Till project and is the author of the book on this subject, called Organic No-Till Farming, Advancing No-Till Agriculture, Crops, Soil, Equipment. He is a past chair of the National Organic Standards Board and currently sits on the boards of Regenerative Organic Alliance as board chair and the Soil Health Institute. Jeff is a founding board member of Pennsylvania Certified Organic and past founder and board chair of the Seed Farm, a new farmer incubator project. So Jeff, wow, just an amazing career that you've had already thus far. And I know you have a really important perspective to share with our audience. And we're going to talk dirt today. We're going to get dirty here. So let's just dive right in and want to ask you, what's the big deal? What's the big deal about, soil and regeneration? Why does this even matter?
Wow, that's, the whole idea of regenerating the health of the soil is key to our survival as a human species. We have to go back in time a little bit to really get into the ground and dig up the dirt on regeneration and what we're talking about. Our founder, J.I. Rodale, way back in 1942, he wrote some words on a blackboard. He said, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. So he was really, I don't know if he was a visionary. Some people say he was. I don't know if he was a genius. I don't know if he was just lucky. It doesn't really matter. He stumbled onto something that has really captured the attention of people as he began to tell us as farmers that our role was not to produce food, and it wasn't to manage the soil. It's to make people healthy. Now, the tools that we use are the soil and the food, but how we manage that, the end goal has to be to make people healthy. So he would say, if the goal, for example, of farmers is to kill weeds, then Roundup is a great tool. But if the goal is to make people healthy, it's a terrible tool. There's no way you can use Roundup to make people healthy. It just doesn't move you in the right direction. So he began to look at and discuss this production paradigm that he called organic agriculture. And it sort of caught on, but it was moving relatively slowly. His son, Robert Rodale, took over the Rodale Enterprises in 1971 when J.R. Rodale passed away. And he was a little frustrated with the speed at which organic practices were being adopted. So he was an early proponent of sort of giving the standard or creating a standard within the federal government and working with the USDA. Many people were upset then. Many people are still upset, 30 years later, that's what happened with the word. But he saw it as an opportunity to move farther and faster, because if you had a word that is sanctioned by the USDA, certainly it carries a lot more panache in the marketplace and things will move farther, faster, and they have. But he was also pretty smart, and he recognized that when you give something away, you lose control. So we lost control of the word, and we gave up a lot of concepts that were originally part of organic. For example, the idea of continuous improvement. That got kind of shelved early on in the conversations with the federal government because they wanted to put our organic standard under their marketing division. And how does an ag marketer certify continuous improvement? It just was too esoteric for ethereal for them to grasp. So they put that off on the side. There was always this idea that organic was supposed to be good for the soil. And so there's a little bit of language in the law about soil, but it's really not very strong. There was always a concept in the organic farming community that dealt with animal welfare. But the standards in our NOP program are relatively weak on animal welfare. And then the organic standard, the way it's written today in our national NOP regulations, National Organic Program regulations, there's no language at all around human health or social justice or any of those community kind of activist or activism components. And so he was really interested in figuring out how do we magnify the word organic and make it mean what it really should mean and embody all of those tools. So he came up with the word regeneration. At the time he was talking about that was late 1970s, early 1980s, and he was talking about regenerative agriculture, and everybody sort of poo-pooed that idea and said, no, we're going to really gravitate towards this word sustainable and sustainability. The problem with the word sustainability, and that's never been a Rodale word, is it's a relatively weak word. It's not a strong action word. Now, it's a simple word to understand because people understand what sustain means, but you can sustain a bad system with enough inputs. And some systems and some processes really should not be sustained because that's not what we want to do. So if somebody said, how is your life? And you said, oh, it's sustainable, they'd be kind of sad. Or how's your relationship with your spouse or your significant other? And you said, oh, it's sustainable. Yeah, just like you're smiling and I am too. People chuckle and go, yeah, that's not a good word. I don't want to sustain it. And if you talk to people in the international community, particularly people that are struggling financially or struggling with their farm operation because they don't have enough inputs to do what they want to do, or don't have access to markets, and you say, how would you like to sustain what you have? They said, no, we want to improve it. So he was looking for a word that showcased this concept of improvement, continuous improvement, and he latched onto the word regenerative. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. What we've done now at Rodale Institute in working with some major brand partners is we've linked those two words together. And so now we talk about regenerative organic certification, regenerative organic farming practices, because we really believe that organic is a baseline by which we really should be farming to get the chemistry and the synthetic chemicals out of our food production system. Going back to that original paradigm, trying to make people healthy, we got to get those chemicals out of the system. And then we can launch from there into a regenerative model where we really do include animal welfare, social justice, and then, of course, focusing on healthy soil.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is such an important and central discussion that affects all of us. And you know, one of the things I notice when we're doing the Why on Earth work and events all around the country is that a lot of folks still have this impression that organic agriculture is somehow this new thing, or even a fad, or some sort of marketing invention. And so I often have a lot of fun on a stage going clear to one end and saying, let's create a timeline and start maybe with the Egyptian Empire and walk our way back through a few thousand years of history, all of which basically was organic agriculture right up until about a century ago. And what I think is so important for folks to understand, to really understand, is that this chemical and synthetic form of agriculture is the aberration. It is the thing that is absolutely outside of the norm of how we ordinarily tend to do agriculture as a species. And I wonder if you come into that sort of encounter with folks, you know, not really understanding the context the way it needs to be understood.
Well, we certainly do. I would say that the timeline that you defined is exactly correct. The current industrial agricultural model that we have in place, not just in the United States, but globally around the world, is a relatively new phenomenon that was really designed around this concept that what we need to do is focus all of our energy on tons of output.
Yeah.
We focus very little on true quality. Now, every farmer wants to produce a quality product, and I'm not suggesting they don't. want to do that. But the measuring stick by which we judge success on farms, or that we incentivize farmers to operate, is based on yield. It's a little disingenuous to suggest that the true sum of our ability to survive on the planet comes down to tons and tons of commodities. Obviously, we have to produce food because we have billions of people to feed, and I'm not suggesting that that's not important, but it's not the sole measuring stick. We should not say, well, farmers are judged only on their ability to produce tons and tons of this yellow stuff that we call corn, and they don't even see it as producing food. Most of the farmers across the Midwestern part of the United States don't really see themselves as food producers. They're commodity growers. They grow commodities of corn and beans. The corn could be used for ethanol. It could go, there's probably corn in this vest. I have no idea. There's corn and soybeans in everything. And so they don't really see themselves as food producers. Well, when we separate the concept of agriculture from food production, we've disincentivized farmers from paying attention to what their real goal is. And then at the same time, what we've done is we've said we're willing to sacrifice our soil and our environment and our ecology for the sake of that yield. So it doesn't matter what you do to the soil. Farmers aren't judged on that. Do whatever you have to do, get as many tons as you can, produce them as cheaply as you can, and try to survive on the margins. And that's really an unfair system. Farmers have always done what we've asked them to do, and unfortunately, we've asked them to do the wrong thing. Now, where I disagree with the timeline is that when we look at organic agriculture or regenerative organic agriculture today, while we do look at the past to see what farmers did that was good, we've also modernized it. So we pay attention to modern ag engineering. We pay attention to modern biology. So we're using good plant genetics. We're not suggesting that what we do is go back in time and put a few million bison on the Great Plains, put a few Native Americans out there to manage them, and say that's organic agriculture, that's where we should head. That's not the direction we're heading. We're going to take advantage of precision agriculture. We're going to take advantage of robotics. We're going to take advantage of all the tools that are at our disposal, so long as they don't interfere with our ability to make people healthy. So those tools that we've incorporated in agriculture that don't lend themselves to human health, we're going to sit on the shelf and say they no longer have a role to play in food production or fiber production, because they're destroying the soil, they're destroying the animals and the biodiversity on that live in that environment and ecology, and then we're also, unfortunately, making ourselves sick. And that's kind of where we're stuck. And we understand that there's big business that's pushing the current model, and there's a lot of incentive out there in the business world to keep the status quo going. Change is expensive, change is difficult. Even positive change can be challenging and difficult. We understand that. You graduate from high school, you go to college, positive change, still struggle, there's tension, we understand that. You're single, you get married, tension, we understand that, but it's a positive change. Well, the same thing happens when you move from a chemical-based system to an organic system. There's stresses in there. What we need to do now as a society is figure out, certainly we have to agree that that's where we want to go. And if we do agree with that, then we have to work with those producers and farmers out there in the countryside and ranchers and say, how can we help you navigate this tumultuous transition period?
Yeah. One of the things that you're spearheading and innovating on is the Regenerative Organic Certification program that's in the process of being rolled out this year, 2020. And I am so thrilled with my own personal background in the food and agriculture arena for many, many years. I am so thrilled about this step that we're now taking, and about the both opportunity and imperative for us as consumers to do really all that we can do to support with our dollars for those food purchases, those beverage purchases, those fiber clothing purchases, as much of this emerging regenerative organic certified method of production as we can. And I'm thrilled to dive into that and really to share that as a very hopeful and groundbreaking, no pun intended, development that's underway as we speak. And I want to hear from you. What are you excited about? What are the challenges? And how does the general public fit into helping this thing move forward as quickly as possible?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the model that we're creating around regenerative organic certification and the alliance that we built to move that model forward. It's a real exciting time. I mean, one of the things that Rodale Institute prides itself on is that we are a solutions-based company. There are a lot of organizations out there, nonprofits, activist groups that are really, really good at pointing out problems.
Yeah.
We tend to be really, really good at pointing out solutions. That's what we're all about. You know, we don't want to sit here and say, you know, it's easy to say Roundup is bad. Okay, what's the alternative? How do we give people solutions to work around that? That's what Rodale is all about. The other thing we're really good at is putting science around this story. We are a science-based organization that focuses on soil health, and food production with an end goal of having healthy populations. So we see ourselves really as a human health organization, although we work in the soil. So it seems a little odd, but I was just meeting with a cardiologist yesterday that was talking about heart health and how he traced heart health back to dental health, which traces back to breathing. And he said, but at the end of the day, heart health starts with how farmers treat the soil. And, you know, it was an enlightening moment for him when he came to that conclusion that he said, what I really need to do is get people to eat a healthy organic diet. Of course, they need some exercise. That's part of heart health. But he said, if they don't feed themselves properly, and if we don't take care of the soil properly, it's impossible for people to have human health. So that's really an amazing link that we've been able to make through this scientific enterprise that Rodale Institute is all about. Now, what we've done is we've tried to create a certification model so that we can bring customers, consumers, and the average person into this dialogue. Because as you just alluded to, we all vote with our dollars for a particular food production system. We vote sometimes 3, 4, 5 times a day. It depends on your eating habits, but we vote constantly with our dollars, and people aren't really always paying attention or aware of what they're doing with those food dollars. So what we've done is we've partnered with a bunch of brands that produce food and fiber products and said, how do we orchestrate a new certification system that consumers can rally around so that they can purchase products that incorporate a whole suite of values that they come to the marketplace with. Most customers or consumers come to a grocery store, a restaurant, or wherever they purchase their food, or if you're buying fiber products, you come with a suite of values, not just one. Some people are single issue voters. Most people have a whole suite of issues that are of concern to them. Same thing is true in the marketplace. So, for example, one of our concerns was if somebody wants to come and buy a product that is organic, that's great. But somebody else may come and say, well, I'm really interested in social justice. So I'm looking for a product that addresses my social justice concerns. And then we have people that say, why can't I have both? Why can't I have a product that both embodies my values around getting the chemicals out of the system and having an organically certified product, as well as a product that has a social justice component to it, or an animal welfare component, or carbon sequestration, because the climate's really important to me. Why can't I have all of that? We believe you can, and you should, and people deserve that. And that's the rallying cry around which we hope consumers begin to focus as we roll out our regenerative organic certification and seal. You know, I've talked with a farmer. I like to deal with visuals because I'm a visual person. And this farmer said to me, I feel like a Boy Scout with a sash full of merit badges because I have so many logos on my product that I'm trying to sell because I'm animal welfare approved and I got a social justice label and I've got an organic seal and I'm halal and I'm kosher and I'm all these things. He said, couldn't I just find to continue with that Boy Scouts theme, he said, when you get enough merit badges, you become an Eagle Scout. Yeah. And then that's the only merit badge you use. You just show it to everybody. Oh, I'm an Eagle Scout. And people, even if they weren't in scouting, they recognize that it took a lot of work to get that, and there's a lot embodied in that one merit badge that you got, which is the Eagle Scout badge. And so the farmer said, can't I have one seal that says I do it all? Everything that's important to people on this planet in terms of their health or the climate or the environment, I do it. And I do it really well. Can I get a seal that sets a high bar standard that means I do that? We think you can, we think you should, and we're developing that. Now, certainly our goal with creating this standard, which is called the Regenerative Organic Certification, or ROC, the ROC seal, which will be rolling out in supermarkets in the next few months. Our goal is not to be the 1% of the 1%. Our goal is to set a high bar standard that leads everybody in the industry to the next level of production. People follow leaders, and they follow groups that move in a positive direction. And nobody wants to be left behind and said, yeah, I'm going to do it the old way. There's no cars that get made today with drum brakes. They all have disc brakes because it's such a much better mode of stopping a vehicle. I mean, you get a bicycle that has disc brakes on it now, not the old little grabber things, It's got disc brakes. Perfect. It works. So everybody wants to move to that next level. And we understand that there aren't any farmers, even in the conventional model, who are deliberately trying to mismanage their soil. But unfortunately, that's what's happening. And so what we want to do is encourage processors and producers to buy products that are produced under the Regenerative Organic Seal. And that way we know that the labor on the farm was treated fairly. We know, and the farm could be international. This is an international certification, not just a domestic certification. So people who are buying a food product that came from India or Argentina or any other country in the world, you'd like to know that the people who produce that food, who process that food, were treated fairly, or that fiber, a fiber product, that they were treated fairly. Any animals that were involved in the system were treated fairly, and that the soil is improving with time. So whether we sequester carbon in India or in Indiana, it's all the same to the planet. We just got to drag that carbon out of the atmosphere and get it in the soil. And this regenerative model actually does that.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. It's a race to the top, right? Instead of a race to the bottom. Yeah. It's so potent. What are some of the brands that you're excited about that we as consumers will be able to buy here in the coming months?
Well, I would encourage all of your listeners and viewers to go to the Regenerative Organic Alliance and check out the brands that have signed on with us. It's changing daily, so I don't want to leave anybody out when I call out specific brands. But two of the leading brands that have been involved with Rodale from the very beginning and have taken a real leadership role are Dr. Bronner's from Dr. Bronner's soap, because they use a lot of organic ingredients in their products, and then also Patagonia. Both Patagonia Fiber and Patagonia Provisions are really excited about what we're doing here, because they want to bring the finest, highest quality product to the marketplace at a fair and reasonable price. And they know that their customers and their clientele pays attention to what they're doing with their company and their organization. But there are many. I think there's 42 brands. Danone is on there. Applegate Farm is on there. There's just a load of brands out there. Again, I hesitate to, because I don't have the list in front of me, and I know I'm going to upset somebody if I don't mention their name on your podcast, but there's a lot of them. So I would just encourage your listeners again to go to the Regenerative Organic Alliance, look up all the Alliance members, and of course support those brands that support the ideas, the values, and the mission statements and vision that all your listeners really admire and adhere to, because that's the only way we're going to survive, is if people say, yeah, that's important to me, it's important to them, I'm going to support them, I'm going to buy product anyway, let's buy that product and move the needle. Like you said, it's a high bar standard, lifts everybody up. Everybody's going to have to move in order to work towards that goal.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'll be sure to include the Regenerative Organic Alliance link in our show notes when we publish this episode, so folks can find that very readily right there in the show notes. And I really appreciate the shout out to the few that you mentioned, and that there are many others that we should all know about. So I'll even go in and look for the list and list several beyond the few that you've mentioned here. And Jeff, one of the things, as you were talking about how we vote several times a day when it comes to buying food, 3, 4, 5 times.
I'm voting for 5. Just so
yeah. No, well, this is something I've thought about a lot and actually wrote about in the book Why on Earth. Having sold food products to restaurants in particular, I've come to understand that actually often each meal is 10 to 15 or even 20 votes, because we're bringing together all these different ingredients. We're bringing together spices and oils and so forth. And so each one of those components is a single signal going out into the global marketplace. And if it's from a conventional chemical-based agricultural production system, we're basically telling the global marketplace we want more of that. Whereas if it's organic and regenerative, we are telling the global marketplace we want more of that to be made. And so I really emphasize for folks the immense power that we each wield with our consumer demand decisions, and that whether it's the groceries we're buying to bring home to prepare foods or our choices to eat out at places like restaurants, these are having very real impacts on soil and water and people all around the planet.
Yeah, I was just talking. I mean, part of it is education and knowledge of what we're doing. Some people say, oh, well, organic or regenerative organic, when I vote with my dollars, it's going to cost me more dollars. Problem that we have isn't that organic food is overpriced or too expensive. It's that conventional food is undervalued and the true cost of the production is externalized. So you don't pay for it at the point of purchase when you buy food, but you pay for it down the road. I was just talking to a woman today in a meeting, a professional person who said she was struggling with some autoimmune diseases, and her doctor said, get on a more plant-based diet and try to reduce your meat consumption, which she did. They also tested her for glyphosate contamination, which she had some in the body. But when she switched to a more plant-based diet, her glyphosate levels went up in her body because she never made the connection between how the food was being produced and the food she was consuming and her health. And so what she found out was she had to switch to an organic plant-based diet.
Yes.
And then those levels came down and her health came back. Right. And it's like, the way we produce food has a huge impact on its ability to sustain or improve or regenerate the health of our individual cells. So we really need to look at that. So she was saying, yes, I was buying food and it was cheap food and it was still vegetables. So you think, oh, I eat more fruits and vegetables, that's good. It is and it isn't, because of the way we're producing things. So you either pay the doctor or you pay for EPA to clean up the chemical spills, or you pay to clean up the river. We have to dredge the Mississippi River every year because we wash topsoil in because of the way we farm. If we stop farming that way, you wouldn't have to pay for the dredging, but you'd pay, the price of food would go up, but then you wouldn't have to pay for dredging. Now, I'm not trying to put dredgers out of business. That's not my suggestion here. But we have to really look at all those external costs that we've incurred in our food production system, let alone the climate impacts that we're all seeing, where we're sending carbon into the atmosphere instead of keeping it in the soil where we need it. We have to pay for those prices somewhere. And just simply changing the way food that we eat is produced could mitigate so many of these problems. Yeah. That's where the solution lies.
I absolutely love it. It reminds me of a wonderful and pithy quote from the great regenerative farmer, philosopher and comedian Joel Salatin. And I recall him saying something like, if you think organic food might be a little bit expensive, have you priced cancer lately? And when we look at the whole system, when we look at our own lives and the lives of our friends and family, loved ones, to really understand these interconnected points and impacts, I think is so important. And you mentioned glyphosate, which is, of course, the active ingredient in a very potent pesticide that's in products known as Roundup and others. And it was just a couple of years ago, 2018, when the producer of Roundup, Monsanto, was found liable for the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma of a groundskeeper, a guy named Dwayne Johnson. and was ordered to pay $289 million in damages. And since then, there have been a whole slew of lawsuits, including class action lawsuits around this. And the truth, the bottom line in this is that here in the United States in particular, although it is global, we've been the unwitting guinea pigs of a massive chemistry experiment. And it's been in many ways destroying the gut microbiome in our own bodies, which has absolutely been impacting our immune systems, other health issues like cancer, etc. And even science is emerging, making connections to cognitive performance, behavioral performance, these sorts of things. It's a really important issue, and I'm just thrilled to know, Jeff, that you and your team are helping to connect these dots for folks in a way that's, again, very focused on the solutions and on the actions that we can be taking.
Yeah, there's so much that the soil does for us that we don't understand. We just became aware a few years ago of an amino acid that's produced by soil funguses. And of course, our scientific team would say certain bacteria that act like funguses in the soil that produce an amino acid called ergothioneine. And I would encourage all of your viewers and listeners to Google search when they're done, or Bing search, or whatever search engine you want to use. Search the word ergothioneine. Turns out that we've known that ergothioneine exists since like 1909 or something like that, but we didn't know where it was produced or how it was produced, and we didn't really know what it did. Well, it turns out that it helps the human body fight off certain cancers, colon cancer being one of those, and also certain neurological diseases like attention deficit disorder and autism and Alzheimer's. When you look at what's on the rise in this country, it's attention deficit disorder, Alzheimer's, and autism. So rates that cannot be explained simply by diagnostic testing. Yes, I think we've broadened the spectrum of what autism is, or maybe attention deficit disorder, or even moved on from saying normal dementia is maybe was misdiagnosed and should have been Alzheimer's. I understand that, but not enough to say we went from 1 in 10,000 people to now 1 in 25 people having autism. That's insane.
Yeah.
And you can't say that's diagnostic. You can't say the world hasn't changed that much. Yeah. The way we produce our food has. And so we've eliminated, if you look at ergothioneine levels in the food, they have been dropping steadily over the last 50 to 100 years. Mm. So it tracks. I understand correlation is not causation. I understand that.
Yeah.
You start to hold up all these models one after another in front of a kindergarten child, and they're going to go, okay, I can see the picture that this is painting, or I can see how the pieces of the puzzle make a picture, and the picture is clear to me, and I don't need 7,000 studies and 30 years of work like we did with the tobacco industry to prove that smoking isn't healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, when a kindergarten kid, when you ask them, does sucking smoke into your lungs make you healthy or not, they're going to go, no. But of course, we spent 30 years and 7,000 studies to showcase that, yeah, that was bad for us. It's not a good practice. Now, we still have people who smoke, and that's certainly their right to do that. But no doctor in the world today says, well, if you smoke 1 pack a day, if you want to get healthy, smoke 2. That doesn't happen. They're going to say, you stop smoking and reduce that intake. That's not good for you. We're doing the same thing now with soil. We're saying you can't have healthy soil when you spray millions of tons of Roundup or any other pesticide on it. You can't use poisons to make people healthy. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to make the soil healthy, and without healthy soil, you can't make people healthy. So these are all linked together. We don't have to do studies to see that. You know that. I know that. Your listeners know that. How do we begin to encourage farmers to do what we want them to do? Because they will. Because they want to do what we ask them to do.
So, absolutely, Jeff.
It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple, but yet it's pretty complicated.
Oh yeah. We got a lot of work to do, clearly, but it is simple. So let me remind our audience that this is the Y on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Perry, and today we are speaking with Jeff Moyer, the CEO of Rodale Institute, which is part of a consortium that is helping launch the new Regenerative Organic Certification. And I want to give a special shout out to some of our sponsors who make this podcast series possible, along with the rest of our community mobilization work for climate action, soil regeneration, and cultural healing. And that includes Earth Coast Productions, Patagonia, the Lidge Family Foundation, Purium, and Waylay Waters. And I also want to give a huge shout out to the folks who have joined our monthly giving program, which is also key to supporting this ongoing work. If you haven't yet joined and you'd like to, you can go to whyonearth.org/support and join at any level. Now, in a special partnership with Waylay Waters, if you choose to join at either the $33, the $88, or the $133 levels, you'll get monthly shipments of our special CBD hemp-infused soaking salts to help with your own health and well-being. And you can find info on that at whyonearth.org/waylay-waters. That's WELE-waters. So a huge thanks to all our supporters. And Jeff, I'm gotta admit to you that when I first heard about what was being put together with the Regenerative Organic Certification, I was overjoyed, because having worked for 20 plus years in the food and agriculture arena, I was seeing that there was a really important missing link for the consumer demand pathway to get further activated around this whole host of positive beneficial attributes in agricultural production. And I guess I'm curious just to get a little bit of the backstory, the behind the scenes. How did this all start to come together with your friends at Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's and others out there?
Oh, well, yeah, obviously this is a journey. It is a journey. It had some beginnings, and I don't know where it'll end, but we're still in the midst of the journeying. Let's see. I mentioned how we started with the history of those words. The word organic and the word regenerative were always Rodale words. They've been Rodale words for 7 decades as we've moved on this path. And so when organizations like Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's were interested in trying to expand their vision of how food was produced, it was only logical that they reached out to Rodale Institute. We initiated a conversation that branched out into a giant listserv. I'm going to guess eventually there was at least 100 people or organizations on this listserv. And the conversation got really spread out. It got really far and wide as people were talking about how can we be regenerative without being organic. And it's a little bit like saying, I want to be an athlete, but what I really want to do is sit on the couch and eat potato chips and smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
You can say you're an athlete, but it doesn't make you an athlete. So we, a group of us, we sort of pulled back, and I said to the group, to Patagonia folks and Bronner folks, let's pull this back. We heard everything that people are going to say. We've heard it all, and now there's just all this fighting between everybody trying to prove that they're right and that there's multiple paths to regeneration. And I don't discount any of that conversation, and I wouldn't say that there aren't multiple paths to a regenerative system, but they all pass through the word organic, because you can't be regenerative and still use pesticides on the soil. And there are people who say, well, I am regenerative and I improve the health of my soil. I just use a little bit of chemistry, just a little bit. It's like, yeah, that's just a little bit too much, because, it doesn't take much to kill microbes and to kill that tiny life in the soil. I was talking with a fellow who said, well, and he was a soil scientist, and he works in the area of fertilizer enhancers. One of the problems that we have with fertilizer in a conventional system is we put nitrogen fertilizer out on the field, and it's basically a salt. When you put salt in water, it just dissolves and goes away. Some of it will volatilize and go up into the atmosphere, and some of it will just leach into the soil. So chemistry, we're pretty smart as people, and the chemists have figured out a way to encapsulate that fertilizer granule in a way that the way fertilizer decomposes in the soil is the microbes attack it. So as soon as you put that fertilizer on the ground, microbes attack it, it leaches into the soil, and it's gone. So if we can stop the microbes from attacking it, it won't decompose, and we can essentially have a time-release fertilizer. So if we're planting corn, we can put all the fertilizer on in spring, and it will release slowly over the course of the season as the corn plant needs it. Perfect. The problem is, the only way to do that is to kill the microbes in the soil, so that they don't attack the molecule. So you encapsulate it with a fungicide and a bactericide that kill all of the microbes that happen to be near where that fertilizer pellet landed on the soil, and then you have a time-release fertilizer. So this person was saying, well, that's regenerative. Well, how can you say, well, we're going to use less fertilizer? I said, yeah, but you killed all the microbes in the soil. He said, yeah, but just for a little while. Eventually they come back. So it's like saying, well, if you had chemotherapy once a year, it would be okay, because, yeah, we're going to destroy all your gut biome, but you'll recuperate. But as soon as you recuperate, we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do that for decades and centuries. And that's crazy to think that we can improve the health of the soil that we need to survive by treating it that way. You just can't. So in a more regenerative organic model, we're saying, no, that kind of chemistry, those tools, while they're fascinating from a scientific perspective, they don't really work. And we're going to focus our energy on those tools that do encourage us to be healthy, that do encourage soil health and help us regenerate the planet, regenerate our climate, be able to live and farm in a climate which is drastically changing. We see that almost every day in every part of the country. Everybody says the weather isn't the way it used to be. Unfortunately, our grand productivity scheme of trying to focus on tonnage was based on cheap oil and a very steady climate. None of those exist anymore. So the model is no good. We need a new model. Regenerative Organic is that model, and we're excited to move that forward with our partners who have, like I said, they've gravitated to Rodale because we've always been there. We have a reputation for being, as I mentioned, a solutions-based company, but also an organization that's seen as a voice of reason in a very chaotic world. We are not activists, although we try to incentivize change. We do that by inspiring people to greatness, not by chastising them or beating them up. So we would never suggest that any farmer is doing something wrong. We're just going to point out a better model and hope that they gravitate towards it, and then support that gravitation towards that model with consumer demand.
Absolutely beautiful. And folks can go to rodaleinstitute.org. That's RODALE institute.org. And can folks make donations there as well to support that work?
Oh, they sure can, Aaron.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. I can tell you there is only one organization like us in the world, and that's because it's expensive to run a research organization that is not tied to product sales. We don't sell a product. We've got the worst business model in the world. I tell everybody we give it away. We produce science, we produce information, and we give it away. We give away training, we give away our expertise, because that's what our philanthropic dollars allow us to do. So yeah, I would encourage all of your listeners, if they can, if they're able, to go to our website and figure out a way to donate to us, to take an action step, even if that action step is simply buying more organic food. Obviously, that doesn't help us directly, but yes, you can donate to us. Our app, our phone app, our smartphone app, no matter what kind of system you use to do that, is very easy. One push a button, and you can donate to us, and we appreciate every donation that we get. We treat it with the greatest of dignity and respect, and put it to good use.
Yeah, beautiful, Jeff. And I know that you guys also have a strong social media presence with Instagram, Twitter, and others. And we'll be sure to include the links in our show notes for all of that as well, so that folks can find you and like and follow the work that you're doing out there in the social media realm.
That's great. You can see from my image that I am not a millennial, and so I don't have our social media addresses buried in my head, because unfortunately or fortunately, I don't use social media. So we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we tweet, we do all those things to get, and it's important that people know that, because we're trying to get the information into the hands of folks that can make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, that leads me to one of my final questions here, which is, with respect to the growing Y on Earth community, and we've got folks in communities throughout the United States, throughout North America, and increasingly worldwide, and in particular our growing network of ambassadors, what's an additional call to action in addition to buying organic, looking for the regenerative organic certified products, and in addition to supporting Rodale? What else would you encourage people to do more of, to do in their communities to help with this big picture that we're all working on?
Well, I think anything that folks can do to share information and share this story,
Yeah.
which is a very positive story. And I think that's what's important for all of us to understand, that because of the science that we've been doing here at Rodale and other places as well, we've been able to document very clearly that all is not lost.
Yeah.
Yes, soil is degrading worldwide. The United Nations will tell you that soil degradation is happening everywhere on the planet. It's either being covered in salt, it's turning into desert, it's being built on, it's being flooded. So many things are happening, and we're losing that productivity of the soil. But the beauty of it is we can turn that around.
Yeah.
By changing the way we farm, nature wants to work with us. They want to see that happen. It wants to see that happen. And if we apply different practices to the soil, we can make a difference. And so it's a positive story that everybody can share with someone. Why would you keep a positive story to yourself? Share that information, talk to people, organize around that, talk to your politicians. Policy has a lot to do with how we farm on this, in this country in particular, but of course all of North America and much of the world. Decisions that are made in Washington, D.C. impact the way we farm in Iowa, which impacts the health of children in Boston. Yeah. It's all connected. So we got to get to politicians and say, we want to encourage you to support farmers that want to transition. How do we encourage bankers to give low interest loans to farmers that want to do something good, rather than penalize them by giving them high interest loans because they find it more risky? How do we absorb some of that risk through our policies? We know we can do that. If that's something we want to do as a society, there's room for everybody in this messaging platform that we're talking about. If you're a storyteller, tell the story. If you're a podcaster, do a podcast. If you're simply a consumer, consume smartly and wisely and support that. If you're philanthropic, make those donations. Wherever you see your skill set fitting in, help that happen. It doesn't matter where you are on the economic spectrum. We know that in our local communities here, some of our underprivileged folks or ethnic groups that are Spanish-speaking communities, they're interested in human health. They've got families. They want their children to be healthy. How do we create mechanisms that make these foods affordable for them? Here in Pennsylvania, for example, where Rodale Institute is housed, we've worked with our state so that we've created a double SNAP program. So if you buy organic food through one of our CSA shares or membership organizations, which we take to underprivileged communities, you get double SNAP. So you get the food at half price. So it's not like we can't afford to put this food where it belongs. It should be in schools. Instead of having just regular old fruit that's contaminated with pesticides, why don't we have organic fruit in every grade school across the United States in the cafeteria? We can do that if we make that decision. And a simple decision like saying, I want organic milk or organic apples, everything else starts to change. People start to question and say, well, okay, let's start with apples. Let's start with milk. How do we go to the next level? And it encourages the industry to grow, and farmers are going to say, hey, this is what people want. This is what I want to produce because it's really what I wanted to do anyway.
Yeah.
So everybody has a role to play. Everybody has a voice. Whether you're buying fiber, buy organic fiber. But buy organic fiber where you do your homework and understand how the people who produce that fiber were being treated. Yeah. Was it organic cotton from Turkey that was harvested by school-age girls? That could happen. And that's not what we want. So we want to have to do our homework, use your technology. I was just in a local store here in a small town with a store owner that I know, and he just said, we were talking about smartphone technology. He said, it used to be if I upset a customer, I probably upset 6 customers or potential customers. Now, if I upset a customer, by the time they get to their car, 6,000 people are upset with me. That's the power of social media. And so I think everybody should get on. Everybody that listens to this podcast, tell 6 people, or tell 6,000. But tell people what you heard. Don't keep it to yourself. Everybody can do that with the push of a few buttons, and encourage other people to hear this story, hear this message, which is positive, which is action-oriented, and they can do something about it.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful and so important, so pertinent, Jeff. And as you're talking, one thing comes to mind that I want to be sure to hit on a little bit more before we sign off for the day, and that is the carbon sequestration piece of this soil regeneration puzzle, and how essential that is to dealing with our climate crisis and to stabilizing our climate. And when we look at the trend of carbon loading in the atmosphere going from 280 parts per million to well over 400 parts per million in a handful of generations, we see in the global carbon cycle that an increase of soil carbon of 10% worldwide is equivalent to sequestering all of that carbon increase we've seen since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. That doesn't mean it's necessarily easy. That doesn't mean that we're not dealing with complex systems and that we need an entire slew of strategies at all scales. But what it means to me is there is a very, very hopeful message in all of this, which is through soil regeneration, we actually have a very real shot at reducing the carbon concentration in the atmosphere and stabilizing our climate. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that for a minute.
Well, for sure. If folks go to our website, we do have a climate white paper, a carbon white paper on our website that explains all the science behind that, and that's very well cited and documented so people can actually look up the research papers that support that science. But you're absolutely 100% correct. The only tool that we have available to us to sequester carbon and pull it out of the atmosphere is photosynthesis. It's the only tool we have, and it works. And it works at scale. I mean, if I had invented photosynthesis or you did, we'd both be Nobel Prize winners, and it'd be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But because we have it and it's free, people ignore it. You know, if you take a teaspoon, and most folks have an idea of how much a teaspoon of soil is. There's more microbial life in that teaspoon of soil than there are people on the planet. Over 9 billion microbes will be living in that teaspoon of healthy soil. Now, if it's desert sand, that may not be the case, but a good, healthy, organic soil, there's more life in the soil than there is above the soil. That life in the soil is all made up of carbon. As we expand that life in the soil, by not poisoning it, by treating it differently, we drag carbon out of the air through photosynthesis and store it in the soil. It's the way all the carbon that we put into the atmosphere got there in the first place. It was all stored in the soil. As it percolated down and got pushed down, we sucked it up as oil and coal, burned it and put it back in the atmosphere. Now we got to get it back down, and the only tool that's going to do that is photosynthesis. So we've got to get more plants on the ground, and we got to get the ground covered with something green and growing. Organic and regenerative organic does that. For example, if I get in an airplane, well, as the snow is starting to melt across the Midwest, and I were to fly from here to California, everything I would see would be brown. That is wrong. It should be green. Farmers should be planting cover crops. When they're not using the soil, cover it with something green and growing so we can sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Unfortunately, we as people have said, well, but that adds to the cost of food, so we're not going to pay for that. Or maybe we do have EQIP funds through the USDA NRCS office that will reward farmers for planting cover crops, but at the very best, it's a break-even operation for them financially. So why would anybody, any of your listeners, get up in the morning and work for a break-even job? You wouldn't do it, I wouldn't do it, there's no incentive to do that. Well, we can't ask farmers to do that either. So we have to change and incentivize them to do what we want to do. So by setting this high bar standard that we've created with Regenerative Organic, we're going to force every farmer in the world to cover crop. That's going to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere and put it in the soil. Because when there's something green and growing, carbon is being pulled, photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, it comes out of the soil, and when it comes back out, it's oxygen, and the carbon's left behind. And it just does that for free all day, every day. It's the only tool that we have. It's the best tool we have, and we have to put it to work. You know, when we had the Paris Climate Accord, the only organization that was there to talk about soil was Rodale Institute. Soil was not mentioned. One of the reasons is people said, well, we don't want to pick on farmers. But if we don't see farmers as part of the problem, we cannot see them as part of the solution. Agriculture is part of the problem. It has to be part of the solution, and it can be, and it's a very positive way to solve this problem. And it's done by people just simply changing the way you purchase food. It's amazing. It works. And yes, it's simple. There's a lot behind it, but we know that we can, 10% of a carbon increase isn't that much. We can do it on almost all the soils of the world. We can't magnify it by 10 times, but carbon is such a small part of a huge volume. So it's like a giant swimming pool. And we're just saying, if you put 2 drops in, put 2.2 drops in.
Yeah.
That's all we're saying, is that's 10% more. And we can do it. We can make that change, and we can do it by changing the way we farm.
It's so wonderful, Jeff. And I'm going to quote you, photosynthesis works at scale. I love it.
It works at scale.
Yeah, it's fabulous. I have a little factoid in my head that photosynthesis is utilizing a little over 1% of all the inbound solar radiation that comes to our planet. And my goodness, that chlorophyll, what an amazing and elegant molecule for it to be able to do what it does with those photons coming from the sun.
Yeah, nature is not very efficient, but it is very effective.
Yeah.
You know, if nature was efficient, an apple tree would have 1 flower. But instead it has thousands of flowers. Some drop off, some happens here, this happens, that happens, and it still produces fruit. So only 10% of the energy is captured, but look at the magic that 10% has in its effectiveness to sequester carbon. Yeah. So you're right, it doesn't have to be efficient to be effective.
Right, yeah, beautiful. Well, Jeff, before we sign off today, I want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience on any of this that we've discussed today?
Well, I would say that the one thing I want people to continually think about and maybe do some homework on, and if I've challenged you to do anything, it's go and look at some of the science that we're talking about. Yeah. Because we're not just, there are many storytellers out there. And I'm not suggesting any of them are wrong or bad. I'm just saying the story that we're telling, the story that we're trying to put in front of people is based on science. Yeah. Science is very important. Agriculture moves on the back of science. Consumers want to know and deserve to know that what they're doing is based on science, that we have good scientific information and data to support what we're talking about, both on the human health side and on the climate health side, on the soil health side. All those pieces can be substantiated with science. It's proven, it works, and people can support it. There's mechanisms to do that through our certification processes, that people can go to the store today and buy an organic product and know that the people who are farming that way have made a change. You know, in this country, maybe I'll end on this if you want, but only 1% of our farmland is farmed organically. Yet 6% of the food that we consume in this country is organic. That means it came from somewhere else. It came from international trade. Why do we have farmers in this country that are refusing to change to a more productive, more environmentally friendly, more profitable system? The only reason is that they're not encouraged to do it. We need to encourage them. We need to incentivize them. We need to address the barriers that are stopping them, break down those barriers, and bring people on board. We unfortunately, we have 6 times as many farmers in this country over the age of 65 as we have under the age of 35. What's the incentive for them to change? Not much. But what we do know is that even the federal government here says that over the next 20 years, over 50% of the land that's managed in the United States will change management. And it's going to be to a younger generation. Younger folks want to farm organically. They want to get involved with soil health. They want to do things that are right. They need support in the marketplace. There's a lot of things. The science is there. Consumers are there. The pieces of the puzzle are right. We just have to put it together to paint the picture we want for the brighter future that we all deserve.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It's a real pleasure to be able to visit with you today.
Oh, it was exciting to be here. If anybody wants to get more information, they can contact me or the Institute anytime. We'd love to talk to them.
Excellent. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Y on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit whyonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code WHYONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the whyonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Why on Earth community.